أول المسلمين means that I have been ordered to be in the forefront of those who have submitted. In other words, he needs to submit more than anyone else. If there's a hierarchy of submission, there's someone that's like me, way down here, submitting somewhat, a little bit here and there. Then there's people that are better than me, and better than me, and better than me, and better than me, until you get to the level of the Prophet. أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. I've been commanded to submit beyond everyone else, which conforms with what was said earlier in the previous verse. This is continuing off of the other. It said, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ مُخْلِصًا لَهُ الدِّينَ. I have been commanded to worship Allah, to obey Allah, to be an abd of Allah. And مُخْلِصًا لَهُ الدِّينَ. My deen, my way of life, my entire existence be purely for Him. Okay. And then obviously as such, you've been commanded to be the first in the ranks of submission. In other words, most submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah tells the Prophet that he has been commanded to be the one who submits more than anyone else. This is one of the things that we meant by the Prophet being the Prophet of submission. He is the one who submits most, and he calls us and everyone else submit to Allah. He's not someone that doesn't submit and just says to others, you all submit. He has been commanded more than we have to submit, and he has received more instructions that he needs to submit to. And then we as his followers follow his submission, and to the degree that we have been commanded, we submit. This is one verse I want to talk about, and I want you to keep in mind what was said regarding it. Recite salawat, please. I want to go to the next verse I have here, which is verse 78, or in other words, the last verse of Surah Al-Hajj. The last verse of Surah Al-Hajj. Again, I will read from the previous verse because the message, the passage, the sentence, in a sense, or this paragraph, if we may use modern terminology for writing, this paragraph starts in the previous verse. But the reference is in verse 78. God says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا. We are addressed, inshallah. We have believed in Allah and the Messenger in the last day and all the teachings. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, or O those who believe. Irka'u, bow. Wasjudu, prostrate. Wa'budu rabbakum, be slaves, act as slaves to your Lord. اعبدوا ربكم وافعلوا الخير, and do good, لعلكم تفلحون, so that you may reach prosperity, falah, or so that you might be prosperous. Then verse 78, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ, and strive in the way of Allah, or in Allah rather, to be more precise with the translation. Jahidu, not fi sabilillah. Here it says jahidu fillah. Strive in Allah, or struggle in Allah. Haqqa jihadih, the truth of his jihad, the truth of his struggle. In other words, a true struggle, a worthy struggle. That can be one of the rough explanations of what haqqa jihadih means. Then he says, هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ. He's the one that selected you, appointed you. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. And He did not make or create upon you فِي الدِّينِ, in His way of life that He has prescribed, a haraj, a narrow passage that you can barely make it. He didn't put that in there. He made the religion such that people can easily go. It doesn't mean there's no difficulty. It means there's not a very tight passageway where barely anyone can fit through. No, you can all go this path. You can all take this path. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. This is the part we're getting to it. مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. The millah, the religion of your father Ibrahim. There's a relationship of fatherhood that Ibrahim has for this nation. The first person on the face of the earth to want Islam submission on this level is Ibrahim. There are many verses of the Quran that talk about the relationship of Ibrahim and this nation, and the relationship of Ibrahim with the Christians and Jews, and the discussions that the Christians and Jews had when they were debating with whether Ibrahim was one of them or not. Allah responds in many ways. One of those responses is that God says, the closest ones to Ibrahim are this prophet and those who follow him. Okay. The prophet of Islam. The relationship of fatherhood is that he is the predecessor. He's the one that fathered the concept of Islam or taslim and submission to Allah. According to numerous accounts, I will mention one of the references in the Quran. Millata abikum Ibrahim. Then God says, and this is the reference, Huwa sammakumul muslimina min qabl. He, not Ibrahim, Allah. Initially when you look at it, you may think since Ibrahim was mentioned, Huwa or he refers to Ibrahim, whereas that is not the case. This is continuing off of the passage that said, Huwa jtabakum. Allah appointed you, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. And then, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ وَفِي هَذَا. And then it explains, لِيَكُونَ, that makes it clear this is not Ibrahim calling you, naming you, titling you, giving you the title of Muslimin. It's Allah. Allah called you, made you, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. Before this religion was revealed, before the Prophet walked the earth, God called this Prophet and his followers Muslimin. And I'll give the reference for that. Min qabl wa fi hadha. And in this revelation. You were referred to as what? Muslimin. We call a person who believes in this religion a Muslim. Okay. That's the title part, but God doesn't play around with words. It's not about a title. This is mentioned. I'm going to hopefully make some references to the verses. So this is where we're going to end this reference. The verse continues. There's other valuable points in there. I don't want to address those. The point is, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَفِي هَذَا. He is the one, God is the one that gave you the title of Muslim before this religion and in this revelation. Now, in the part that has to do with before this revelation, that's where we come to know where it mentions Ibrahim has fathered the value of the concept of materializing and realizing the concept of Islam. Okay. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of Prophet Ibrahim. There's a lot of stories, very important stories that we'll address just slightly for the point we're trying to make here that will benefit all of us, inshallah. It's important that we understand. We're going to be making use of those. The part that is mentioned here is when Prophet Ibrahim, let me actually again start with the verse prior to the one that has the reference in it. That'll be one. So the reference is 127 of Surah Al-Baqarah. But we will start reading from the verse prior to it, which is 127. So 128 is the reference, 127 is the one we're going to start reading. وَإِذْ يَرْفَعُ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَاعِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ وَإِسْمَاعِيلُ. And the time, in other words, remember the time that يَرْفَعُ Ibrahim, that Ibrahim raises the al-qawa'id min al-bayt, the pillars of the bayt, the Kaaba. He restored the Kaaba. Wa Ismail, it wasn't just Ibrahim, Ismail was along with him. Rabbana, when they did that, it quotes them saying this, Rabbana, they made a dua, Rabbana taqabbal minna, O Allah, accept from us. Innaka anta as-sami'ul alim, verily you are the one who hears and you are the one who knows. Then, this is where verse 128 starts. Another dua which is related to, and it contains the word we're looking for. رَبَّنَا وَاجْعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ. O Allah, make the two of us, Ibrahim and Ismail, Muslimain. Again, we're not going to use the word, just the title Muslim, use the Arabic word. No. Muslimain, it has a meaning. When the Prophet was told that I have been commanded to be the first of the Muslimin, it's not a title, it's the meaning that the word contains and conveys. It's that he was commanded to be the first in rank in terms of submission. So the first of the submitters, the one who submits most. Here, Ibrahim and Ismail say, O Lord, make the two of us of those who submit to you. And then, and this is where وَسَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ, we get the idea here. وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِنَا أُمَّةً مُسْلِمَةً. And from our progeny, an ummah that is Muslim to you, meaning submits to you. وَأَرِنَا مَنَاسِكَنَا وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا, and show us our rituals, the Hajj rituals, وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا, and repent on us, إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. So Ibrahim is the first of those who submit in terms of the chronological order on earth, not in terms of rank. In terms of rank, the Prophet was commanded to be awwalul muslimin, the first of the Muslimin, the highest rank of submission, which means the lowest level a person can look at themselves. They have nothing of themselves. Everything is put before the Lord. One has submitted entirely to Allah in a way that's hard for us to imagine, because you might think, well, different people can submit more. But when you're talking about him being the first in rank, that means he's always in the forefront of those who are submitting. What does that even mean? How can you go any further? Well, it means something. It means something there that we need to, maybe through experience, come to know. But let's come down to something that's a little more understandable to us. The idea is the Prophet of Islam and the religion of Islam is a religion that preaches in order for people to reach falah, to reach prosperity as individuals, as society, all people, collectively. If you want to reach falah or prosperity in this life as well as the next life, not only in the next life, the path is submission. The Prophet is a prophet that's been commanded to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond everyone else, more than everyone else, on levels that others cannot even fathom what that level of submission is. The first person, the Quran doesn't say your father in Islam, millata abikum, another of the prophets. He doesn't say it's Jesus. He doesn't say it's Moses. He doesn't say it's Nuh. He doesn't say it's Adam. Our biological father and mother, all of us, regardless of skin color, regardless of language, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of any of that, Our shared biological parents are Adam and Hawa. We all share this set of parents. Nobody comes from anyone else. All right. That's the only lineage that we have, according to the Quran, first verse of Surah An-Nisa and other verses. God doesn't say He's your father in terms of millah, in terms of religion, in terms of submission. It says, Millata abikum Ibrahim. Ibrahim is the first one that submits. That's the verse where he makes the dua. This is before the sacrifice of Ismail. He makes the sacrifice of Ismail. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, the verse says, when it's talking about the sacrifice of Ismail, it says that Ibrahim told his son Ismail that I have seen in my dream, which is the form of communication that he received from Allah, that I am anni aqtuluk, or anni adbahuk, excuse me, I am slaughtering you. He said, O Father, do as your Lord has said, I submit. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, the wording is, when they both submitted, they made a dua, Allah put them through a test, and said, okay, I want you to submit here. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, when they submitted, they reached that level of Islam. A rank that's the beginning of Islam. Islam itself has different ranks. The Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is awwalul Muslimin. But there's a beginning to the rank of Islam. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, at this point. When they entered the realm of Islam in submission, وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ, he put his head down to slit the throat according to his command. نَادَيْنَاهُ أَنْ يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ, we called him, O Ibrahim, قَدْ صَدَّقْتَ الرُّؤْيَا, you fulfilled the dream. You did what you had to do. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ, and we sacrificed, or we Fadayna means that we use a sacrifice instead of him. So instead of Ismail, something less was sacrificed. Let me, in parentheses, say this. My understanding is the notion that this dhibh azim is Imam al-Hussein doesn't make sense. Imam al-Hussein is above Ismail. You don't sacrifice a better person for a lesser person, for a lesser thing. A lamb was sacrificed instead of Ismail. That's the dhibh azim because it's a recurring event. So many people are going to do the dhibh. You don't save the life of someone who is less important and sacrifice someone who is more important for the less important person. That doesn't make sense. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ is the sacrifice of lamb. That's what was sent there. That's what happened in the context. That's what is there. It doesn't seem, I can't make sense of that idea. Whoever believes in it, that's not what I understand. Anyhow, وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَ, they submitted. The importance of the stories of Ibrahim and Ismail is for us to process this idea of submission. Okay? Because we have somewhat of, I think, a misunderstanding regarding this. There are times where we talk about submission, and submission becomes a subject of our discussion. And without looking at examples and instances of submission, we praise the idea, the general concept of submission. But then the same people who praise the concept of submission, when it comes to certain instances that a person needs to submit, they have trouble praising. Not only do they not praise submission in that case, they will reject it and they will consider it illogical. This is what we want to say. In the minds of many, there is a dichotomy between submission, and it's called blind submission, and logic and reason. These are two different things in the minds of many, including many of us. Submission is one thing, logic and reason is another. When we're praising submission, we praise it to death. When it comes to certain instances of submission, we would say, well, that doesn't make sense. That can't be the case. It must be something else. And if someone decides to do something like that, we would have trouble considering that person a good person. And I'll give, when we get to some examples, I'll give some examples. I'm presenting the idea. That's one of the reasons why we're focusing on the idea of submission. There's a lot of reasons that we need this subject, and we need to understand it properly and thoroughly. So, the one who fathered Islam, when we look at the instructions within Islam, the parts that we are familiar with don't seem to contain anything that we find illogical. They don't seem to. And then it comes to points where, we have differences. We start having differences of opinion. Does it say one thing or the other? But the instructions that Ibrahim received in order to become a Muslim, those are pretty clear-cut. You can't really interpret them differently. They're very straightforward. Right? It's something that's already happened. It's regarding 2 or 3 individuals. It's clear what that submission meant. Okay, and we want to talk about that a little bit to understand this, and if there is a dichotomy between, is there such a thing as blind submission in the context of obeying Allah? Sure, blind submission of someone who is not God, someone who is not ma'soom, someone who the ma'sooms have not said to listen to. Some ordinary random person who claims they've had dreams, who claims they've seen things, who claims that, and we have no reason that is divine one way or another to accept them as an authority, to blindly follow them. Sure, we can talk about whether or not that's blind following, and yeah, if you don't ask any questions, you don't care what the reference is, without any divine reference, you just trusted someone, whatever they say you go by, that can be called blind following. Is there anything called blind following or blind submission in the context of religion, in the context of something that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is there not anything called blind submission? It's only submission. And it is supposed to be, in that sense, blind. It is supposed to be such that it does not matter what you feel or think about it. It does not matter whether or not it makes sense to you. There seems to be any logic behind it, or it refutes all known logic. Is it the case that there's something called blind following, in which case, in order to follow what God says, what Islam says, we've got to refer to our sense of reason and to question, this is being said, sure, I know it's clear, the Quran says this. However, if what the wording of the Quran says, according to my reason and my logic, that doesn't make sense, that's wrong. I don't submit to that. I change the meaning. I say, well, God couldn't have meant that. God speaks logic. God speaks reason. Therefore, the sentence that clearly means one thing, because of what my sense of reason, my faculty of reason, my aql understands, I'm going to say, no, this sentence has a different interpretation. And that interpretation is one that I can make sense of. I can see logic and reason in. If it defies my reason, if it defies my logic, then it's not something that I refer to, that I listen to. Is there such a thing in Islam? Are there 2 types of submission? Or is there just submission? And if there is just submission, then what's the role of the aql, the reason, the faculty of reason, and so on and so forth? And this is the main thing that we want to explore with the prophetic examples based on what we understand from Ibrahim. And then you look at Prophet Muhammad being awwalul Muslimin. And this religion being considered the religion of Islam on a level that the Prophet is awwalul Muslimin, and we're following this Prophet, not the version of Ibrahim, not any lesser version of Islam, the highest level of Islam, which is the Islam of the Prophet. We're following that. Once we understand the lesser variation of Islam and Taslim, then we can relate to this religion that comes afterwards and is the one that is the final and the higher version of Islam or submission. Recite salawat, please. I will try to elaborate on the tests that Ibrahim goes through that are related to Ismail, since the two of them, Ibrahim is the first, Ismail is his son. Okay. And Ibrahim, according to the accounts that we have, seems to exceed Ismail, his own son. Okay. The tests of Ibrahim related to Ismail don't start here in Mecca. This is the city of Mecca. The tests that Ibrahim goes through in regard to Ismail start with not the birth of Ismail, they start with pre-birth, the second marriage of Ibrahim. Ibrahim is told to marry Hajar when Sarah, who cannot have a child, at least based on their understanding at the time, she has not had a child from Ibrahim. Sarah, a very great lady, suggests to Ibrahim to have Hajar as a wife. Maybe God gives him a child through Hajar. The beginning of his test is there. He marries her, and that relationship becomes a complicated relationship, especially when the child is born, who is Ismail. Sarah, a very pious lady, very pious woman, who was the one who, amongst them, because that was a divine instruction, Ibrahim listened to the divine instruction. It wasn't just because Sarah suggested something. Maybe Sarah has made a lot of suggestions. Ibrahim didn't go with whatever suggestion that Sarah had. This suggestion, God told him, go by. He married Hajar. Now that he has a child, Sarah, as great as she is, feelings that Allah has put in a woman, especially in that particular woman, different women are different regarding that matter. She got what we call in English, that's called jealousy. You know, in Arabic they call it ghira. Okay, it's a slightly different term. And she can't stand seeing Hajar and Ismail. She makes another suggestion out of anger to Ibrahim. And before, according to some accounts, before she tells him to treat Ismail and Hajar in a certain way, God tells Ibrahim, Sarah, your first wife, will tell you to do certain things that don't sound right to you, but it's your command, do as she says. Sarah tells him, I want you to take Hajar and Ismail on horseback or camelback. I don't know what means of transportation they used. Travel for a certain amount of time, okay, not a destination, in a certain direction for a certain amount of time. At the end of that time, drop them off, leave them, and come back. God has already told him, you're going to listen to that. This is a very difficult thing to do. And if anyone's looking for logic, reason, it makes absolutely no sense. The order seems to be coming from Sarah, who's saying something because of jealousy. God, though, tells him, I know what Sarah, I'm Sarah's Lord. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. You're not going to will or want anything unless God wants it. Sarah does not do anything independent of God. She can't. No one can. To our mind, though, this makes no sense. It gets worse when you walk that time, and when the time comes to drop them off, the last hours, the last days maybe, you've been walking in a desert. There's no sign of civilization. There's no sign of trees. There's no sign of water. And you're wondering, where in the world am I going to be ending this journey and dropping them off? And you get closer to that time, you keep seeing there's no change, no trees. God, am I supposed to? That was the command. Got to do that. In the middle of a desert with nothing there, drop them off, come back. This is one of the commands of Allah. If any of us receive such a command, we would rule it out. It makes no sense. God can't say that. But God has said that. He dropped them off there and he left. Hajar is also a great Muslimah. She is a great woman. She got dropped off there in the middle of the desert, and he returned. He didn't even stay there to put up a roof, look for water, nothing. When we say, well, God tells a husband to take care of his family, well, in this case, God says, no, I want you to drop them off and leave. What are they going to do for water, for food? Nobody, shelter. This is the middle of a desert. We don't know what a desert means. You know what desert animals are? God knows what type of wild creatures were there. There's no protection, there's no shelter, there's no water, there's nothing. Zero sense. But God said it. And that's what Ibrahim does. He drops them off. Doesn't that sound cruel to you? How cruel can Ibrahim be? But God praises him. I commanded him. He drops them off. You know the story of what happens here, some of the stories. We all know. Ismail is a baby. He needs milk. Milk needs water. The mother needs to have water. They run out of water. There's no water. The baby's crying. He needs milk and food, and there's no water. As a result of listening to what God said, God, you dropped us off here. You told Ibrahim to drop us off here. No food, no water. We're going to die here. That's not what Hajar says. Hajar does what her taklif is. Okay, I need to take care of the baby. Let me search for water. She goes on top of one elevation, Safa, and looks for water, thinks she sees some on the other one. According to the common narration, I don't know if she actually sees a mirage or she doesn't see anything, and then she sees the other elevation and goes toward the other one to look around and see maybe she sees some water. She goes on top of that one, doesn't see anything, or sees a mirage and returns to this side, back and forth 7 times. There's no water. But she did her taklif. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls everything beneath the feet of Ismail. He gives them water. You submit to Allah. Allah says, I will take care of you. Ibrahim can't take care of you. When you saw Ibrahim taking care of you, Ibrahim isn't the one that took care of you. I took care of you through Ibrahim, not Ibrahim. I'm the one who sends the water. I'm the one who sends the food to you. I'm the one who sends people to protect you. What are we going to do for shelter, for socialization, for all of that? That water that was given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent birds to drink water from it. People passing by looking for water, they see the birds, they realize there's water there. They move over there. Oh, there's a spring that is gushing out of the earth. This is a place to settle. They settle there. They're provided with people to take care of them. They consider these people holy. They start building them homes, whatever is needed. They go hunting. They bring the food. Allah is the one that brings company to you. He's the one that gives you company. He asks you to submit. After you see what happened, it's easy. We're like, oh yeah, God, okay, yeah. But when they decided to do this, there's no sign of anything. It seems like they're getting dropped off in the middle of a desert. Does that make any sense to anyone here? If it does, I will question your sense of reason. Based on human reason and logic, that makes no sense. Ibrahim is told to go back to Sarah, live there. Okay, what is he thinking? He's not supposed to worry about them, be concerned. After many years, he's told to go and visit them. He goes there and he's told, according to the account, this is not in the Quran. He is told to go there to see Ismail. And he goes there and Ismail is not home. And he's supposed to return. The command was you can't stay. So Ismail is out doing whatever he's doing. You can't stay. You have to return. Ibrahim returns without seeing his son after many years. His first son that he dropped off as a baby, as an infant, he's allowed to go and visit. He thinks he's going to go and see him, but he's not allowed to stay. He goes there, waits a couple seconds, whatever amount that he's allowed to. Then he's got to return. He didn't see Ismail. Go back. Then he comes again. He's told to come back. This time, all right, Ismail, we have to build the Kaaba. You start building a relationship with your son. You see him. You see how intelligent he is. You see how capable he is, how helpful he is, how good akhlaq he has. You start constructing the Kaaba. You do this. You make a dua. You see that, oh, we did this. Oh, Allah, Rabb, waj'alna muslimayn lak. Allah says, okay, you want to reach the level of submission, you need to kill that son of yours. If we are able to process what has happened over the course of these years between Ibrahim and Ismail and how Allah has built this strong feeling in Ibrahim toward Ismail because of the distance and because of not seeing him, and now that he's seen him, the good person Ismail is, the relationship that builds, you finally spend a little bit of time with your son, Allah says, now you got to kill him. Does killing your son make any sense to anyone? You being, if you say, okay, you send them to the battlefield, they get killed, well, that's others doing it. You don't take the life of that person. God says, you are going, don't think about what you know happens in the end. That's not what Ibrahim or Ismail are aware of. The command they receive is, Ibrahim, you need to behead, decapitate, slaughter Ismail. And you're supposed to tell him, and he tells him. Ismail says, do what your Lord has said. Inshallah, Allah will help. I can't elaborate on these examples any further. I want you to think about these thoroughly and really see if there was a command in Islam that was not going to be making any sense to any human being, it will be this. Let me mention one last example that's not actually in Ibrahim, it's in the religion of, it happened during the time of Musa, ala nabiyina wa alihi wa alayhi salam. Recite salawat, please. This is also in Surah Al-Baqarah. Earlier in the chapter, Allah tells us of this. A lot of us don't know about this. I want you to hear this. I'm going to try to translate the verse and see what you think of it. Recite another salawat, please. This is verse 54 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ. And when Musa said to his people, يَا قَوْمِ, O people, إِنَّكُمْ ظَلَمْتُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ. You have transgressed against yourselves بِاتِّخَاذِكُمُ الْعِجْلِ, by taking the calf. In other words, taking the calf as a lord. Remember, they worshipped a man-made idol that was in the shape of a calf and made the sound of one. Say, Ya qawm, or when Musa told his people, you have transgressed against yourselves by taking as a lord, as God, al-ijl, the calf. Fatubu ila bari'ikum, so return to your Lord. Faqtulu anfusakum, kill yourselves. In other words, kill each other. Kill each other. Had you ever heard, did you ever read this verse and know that a command that came from Allah in Banu Israel after they did something as bad as that? The command that came, kill each other. Get out in the streets, each of you take a knife, start killing each other. فَاقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. There's another verse related to this. I don't want to get into that because they didn't do it. They didn't fulfill that. And Allah said, if you would have listened, it would have been better for you. They didn't submit. It's an example of lack of submission. But why did they not submit? This is what Jews are really good at. And we're told all these stories about the Jews so that we don't become like them. This is what the Jews, oh, that can't be right. We're not going to do it. Submission toward Allah is submission, period. Describing it as blind, suggesting that we have got to use what we call our reason, at least according to the Quran and these stories, is not what God asks for. If you want to do something on your own, that's your choice. Everyone, by God's design, has a choice. As the Quran says, لا إكراه في الدين. No one can force anyone. Everyone is going to choose their own religion. But at least understand what God says in the Quran. You make your choices anyway. According to these stories, these examples, these statements, there aren't two forms of submission. There isn't a better form of submission called using your intellect, your sense of reason, your faculty of reason, your aql, deciding whether or not what I heard from God makes sense for me to follow or not. It's submission, whatever He says, and He means what He says. He doesn't, I don't know how we think He doesn't know what words mean. He doesn't know the language that He created. عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ الرَّحْمَنِ عَلَّمَ خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. He created mankind. He taught man expression. He doesn't know the language. He doesn't know what words to select. He chose these words. Like, well, that because it doesn't make sense, he must have meant something else. No, if he meant something else, he would have used a different set of words. He said exactly. Ibrahim didn't say, well, maybe Iblis interfered with that dream of mine. God can't say that. God has communicated. For us, the Quran is there. The actual words of the Ahlul Bayt, not whatever has been attributed to them. What's been attributed to the Ahlul Bayt, according to the Quran, according to the Prophet, according to the Ahlul Bayt, needs to be presented to the Quran. If it conforms with the Quran, they have said it. If it doesn't, they have not said it. But whatever they have actually said, is what they mean. And we have got to go exactly based on. This is submission in Islam. In submission, we are not told, at least God doesn't say, think if it makes sense to you. In fact, the Quran repeatedly says, you don't know, He knows. When we say that I'm going to turn back to my sense of reason, to my faculty of aql as we call it, and we have misconstrued a hadith about aql, and we have taken the word or the phrases or the sentences in the Quran that it says أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, misinterpreted them, didn't use the word that is said there, didn't look at the context of what's being said, and we said, well, God says to use your reason, this is what He probably means. I guess that's what they're saying, because God never said, in this case, Ibrahim, slaughter your son, but use your aql in that. He didn't say that. Where does God say, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? God says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ when He says, He knows and you don't know. When He says, I am the creator of the heavens and the earth, do you not use your intellect to see that? Those are the cases of أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. You can see that. Hadith says, الْعَاقِلْ مَا عُبِدَ بِهِ الرَّحْمَنِ. It doesn't mean aql is a source for us to derive law from in Islam. It's not an independent source of understanding Islamic law. That's not what that hadith means. Al-aql ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman. Aql is the faculty that if you actually use it, it tells you you don't know. And the creator of the heavens and the earth knows. And that He is the master and you are the slave. The aql is what tells you you must do exactly what He says. And if something seems to you to be wrong, but He said it, He knows and you don't know, submit to that. That will have benefits for you. And what you think has benefits for you, you will not have that benefit for you. That's what aql tells you. That's ma ubida ar-Rahman, ubida bihi ar-Rahman. Al-aql ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman. This is what it means. This is what the words mean. Think about it. Al-aql ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman. Aql is what? Through which is something through which God is dealt with the way a slave deals with the master. In other words, God is the master and you become His slave. Does a slave tell the master that doesn't make sense to me? Or does a slave say, whatever the master says, you do? Which is not even the real meaning of ubudiyya. Ubudiyya doesn't just mean listen or obey. It means act as a slave. It means be a slave. A slave does not own himself. That's the foundation of obedience. Once I think I am, and I have rights, but then I say, well, I who have rights, who am and have rights, I'm going to obey God and act as a slave. Oh, that's one level maybe of ibadah of Allah. But being an abd, where the Prophet that we are celebrating his birth and speaking of him as the Nabi of Islam, who's been given the title by Allah as abd, he doesn't act as an abd, he is an abd. He doesn't see anything there of his. There is nothing but he, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ubudiyya means that. Ubudiyya means there is nothing that, there is no I. Once there is an I own something. I have rights. There will always be that. Anyway, that's a intellectual foundation for this. And the reason why it's being mentioned to this degree, I don't want to elaborate any further on that. Aql, if used properly, will not be an obstacle in submission. Aql will never tell you, don't submit to this. This could not have been said by Allah. That's not aql, that's nafs. It just uses words that sound like aql. Just like the enemies of Islam, because the nafs is each individual's enemy. أعدى عدوك نفسك الذي ونفسك التي بين جنبيك. The biggest enemy of yours is your nafs that's between your two sides. The external enemies do the same thing. They feed the worst things to us in the name and the nicest things. The war in Iraq is sold to public opinion as taking democracy to a people. Doesn't so look and sound so nice, so reasonable, so logical. The ugliest thing is framed Iblis, another enemy of all of us. He tricked our father Adam, and it's funny, Christians say Hawa was tricked. The Quran says Adam was tricked. The Quran doesn't say anything about Hawa being the first trick or anything along that at all, along those lines at all. It says Adam was addressed by Iblis, and Adam disobeyed Allah. That's the story in the Quran. Anyway, that's side note for anyone who has that question in mind. What did Iblis say? God said, eat and take from anything that's here except for this one tree. Iblis came and said, هل أدلكم على شجرة الخلد? Do you want me to show you the bush or the tree, the plant of khuld? Khuld means eternally staying here. The opposite of what it was. That was the one thing, if Adam had, he was going to leave that life of luxury that he didn't have to worry about clothing or food. It was all provided without him lifting a finger. So you want me to point you in the direction of a tree or a plant that if you have, God's going to keep you here forever? It sounds very nice, like you want to stay here. Reality is the opposite. He took from it, he had from it, he had to leave. God said, didn't I tell you this? The nafs tries to make something that is illogical, that it does not like, sound logical. That's nafs, it's not aql. Aql will tell you, did God not say, عسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Many times you could like something, it's bad for you, and you could dislike something, it's good for you, and God knows and you don't know. Aql says, you're right, I really don't know. I don't know myself. I don't know what's good for me. I don't know where there is water. I don't know where there are people. To my ignorant eyes and mind, I'm dropping off Hajar and Ismail in the middle of a desert without any support. That's not Aql that sees it in that way. Aql sees that the desert belongs to Allah. Aql sees that Ismail belongs to Allah. Aql sees that Hajar belongs to Allah. Aql sees that God brings the clouds from the oceans wherever He wishes, and He makes them rain wherever He wishes, and makes that rain penetrate the earth wherever He wishes, and where that water comes out of the earth, wherever He wishes. The water goes down in the earth in Siberia, if I get that right, and it comes out under the Kaaba, the spring of Zamzam, as we know it today. God is in control of everything, and He knows everything. You don't know. If He said it, then that's right. Whatever comes to my mind against it, that's not aql. It's never aql. It's just worded in a nice way that sounds reasonable, sounds logical. If God said hijab, then that's the right thing. If God said an Islamic government is supposed to enforce it the way He says to enforce it, don't confuse the militant police, the military police, the brutal police of this country, and how they enforce law. They are law enforcement. That's not what is intended by Islamic law enforcement. But if Islam says an Islamic government is supposed to enforce Islamic law based on the ways and the methods that God mentions, at the time that God mentions, then that is the right thing. People want to come out and say whatever they want. That's not aql. It's not reason. That's Iblis. The same Iblis that made a tree that gets you out of that Garden of Eden seem to you as something that will keep you there for good, is telling you, God said, this is what's good? No, that's not good. That doesn't make sense. This other things that go against that. Protest, riot in the streets, burn. Islam, the Prophet of Islam, is a prophet of submission. He submitted to whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said on levels that we can't even comprehend. The stories of Ibrahim, let me mention this, and maybe this will be our last point. The stories we hear of the submission of Ibrahim may sound to us as more difficult tests compared to what the Prophet went through. But that's because of our deficiency in our information regarding what the tests of the Prophet were, and us not being able to relate to the level of submission that he went through. When we compare the two, when Ibrahim is millata abikum, he's the first, he's the one who fathered this, the presence of submission, the level of Islam on earth. The same Quran says that the Prophet is awwalul muslimin. He is above all in terms of Islam and submission. You can just use that aql and understand whatever it is. I don't know exactly what it is, but whatever it is that the Prophet submitted to is greater than what Ibrahim went through. Without me knowing the details. I don't know the details. I don't know how he submitted to Allah, that his level of submission is greater and above Ibrahim. Brothers and sisters, if we as Muslimin don't just give ourselves the title of Muslim as just a title, a name, we realize if we're called Muslim, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ, God called you Muslim from before, meaning He called you those who submit. We need to submit to Allah. Aql is a faculty that reminds us, hey, don't think you know better than God. Don't think He doesn't know what you know. He knows what you know and what part of it is wrong. And He says, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You have not been given knowledge except for a small portion. Submission is what we are in need of. Brothers, submission starts at submitting to the law. We may have trouble implementing the law. We need to submit to whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. At least accept that that's the right thing. Even if I have a shortcoming in doing it, at the very least, accept what He has said. Accept that to be right. Accept that to be correct. Say, oh Allah, I accept it and I apologize if I'm not doing it 100% right. Help me do that. رَبَّنَا وَجْعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ. Ask that. Make that dua. There is a push today to push Muslims to reject parts of Islam using terms, words, phrases, reasons that seem very reasonable, that cause people to think, oh, that can't be right. And if we do that, we are no longer a Muslim. We have chosen to disobey, and we have chosen to tell God we're not going to submit to you. Therefore, we're no longer a Muslim. There's a strong push in that direction. There's a strong push in us accepting LGBTQ, whatever the next letters are. There's a strong push for us to accept that. Accepting that goes against what God says. God says, if you even agree that that's okay, you will be like the wife of Lut. Lut was a prophet. His wife never engaged in that activity. She was married to a man. They had children. Lut had 2 daughters from her. She never engaged in it. She was punished the same way those who engaged in the act. You look at evidence, why was she punished in that way? Because she didn't consider it wrong. If you don't consider it wrong, so they have the right to do this. You've become like the wife of Lut. You deserve the same punishment. And in the subject matter that we have, you've left the Muslimin. But there's a strong push for us to say, well, why not? We won't do it, let them do it. We should allow them to do it. No. In the end, we're not stopping them physically, but we're never going to approve of that. Lut didn't go up to them and say, here's my sword. If anybody does, I'm going to kill him. No, he said, don't do this, bad for you. They don't want us to say this. They don't want us to voice our opinion. All we're saying is keep that opinion, as Islam says, and voice it every now and then. No, this is not something acceptable. Allah has punished an entire nation, even those who didn't even do it, but they were okay with it. There's a push to make Islam liberalize, or in their words, perhaps liberate Islam. Make it or take it off of the foundations of Islam. The opposite of Islam as the foundation of this religion, the opposite of submission to Allah as the foundation of this deen is liberalism. Do as you wish. The opposite of submitting is do as you wish. Liberalism means do as you wish. They want to replace the foundation of Islam, which is submission, with the opposite of it, which is liberalism. And they use various techniques, various methods. They'll use academics, they'll use masters of literary arts, masters of Hollywood and the film industry and media, masters of deception, to make you feel like as Islam, as Muslims, for justice, you need to move in this wrong direction. We have to be very careful and get this foundation very clear in our minds. Submission, that's it. There's no such thing as blind submission or wise submission. It's only submission to Allah and whatever He has said. If God has said it, when He says you work and you provide for your family, you do that. If He says you leave them and you go to the battlefield and you give your life in the way of Allah, what's going to happen to my wife and child? God said, I'll take care of them. He will take care of them. You go and do that. For those shuhada who have gone and done that. Whatever He says, submit to whatever He says. We hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us of the Muslimin, that He made these prophets at least allow us to reach the bare minimum levels of Islam in this life. Inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the right of the Ahlul Bayt to hasten the return of our Imam, to help all of us be His true and close companions. We ask Allah to help all those who are helping His cause, especially our ulama, our maraja, above all our leader. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us all of our sins, forgive our parents, our grandparents, our relatives, all believers, those who are alive, those who have passed away. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant all of us and all believers worldwide by the right of Muhammad and Al Muhammad, especially Imam al-Sadiq, out of Al Muhammad, the two that we are celebrating their birth by their right. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant all of us and all believers worldwide our hajat, our needs, our requests, relieve all those who are suffering from hardships, difficulties, illnesses. And we ask Allah to relieve all the people of the world of the oppressions they're facing. Bin Nabi wa alih, rahimallah man qara al-fatihata ma'a salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إلهي عظم البلاء وبرح الخفاء وانكشف الغطاء وانقطع الرجاء وضاقت الأرض ومنعت السماء وأنت المستعان وإليك المشتكى وعليك المعول في الشدة والرخاء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أولي الأمر الذين فرضت علينا طاعتهم وعرفتنا بذلك منزلتهم ففرج عنا بحقهم فرجا عاجلا قريبا كلمح البصر أو هو أقرب. يا محمد يا علي يا علي يا محمد اكفياني فإنكما كافيان وانصراني فإنكما ناصران. يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان الغوث 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 أدركني 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 الساعة 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 على عجل العجل العجل يا أرحم الراحمين بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليهم وعلى آبائهم في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليا وعينا أتى تسكنه وارزقاته وتمتعوا فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. نعرة حيدري.
Guys, we need your help to clean up the center outside. We need to pick up some trash, glasses and plates. Can you hear me? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. We need your help to clean up pick up the trash and clean up the area. It may take only 15 minutes if we all do it together.
you need